So, good morning, everyone. Day 3, semi-Euro-friendly stream. It's 7 a.m. for me, well, 7:30 a.m. And that makes it not absolutely insane for a number of people. That before I've had to connect at 3 a.m. I might not be at my absolute best. I mean, I woke up like half an hour ago. We'll see how this goes. We'll see how this goes. And I'm still halfway through my coffee. So I'm only gonna do an hour total because I actually gotta go to work. And we're gonna go over controls for a little bit. Now, super quick intro note. Thanks everybody as usual. You know, if you're following, if you've been beating the drums and letting people know and all of that, that helps a lot. Quite a few things are going alright. Twitch activated the re-encodes because apparently we've had enough viewership and you don't need to be a partner anymore to get just that. So that's pretty good because it means that people can watch the down-res version of the stream. YouTube is going pretty well. I think one of the videos might get the first 1,000 hits like on a single video soon if it hasn't already. It's getting some 30 subscribers a day, which is okay. Now, what I was saying in the announcement video, if you haven't seen it, but the streams get more views than the announcements. Please do the usual YouTube and Twitter dance thingy of retweeting, sharing, liking, subscribing, favoriting, and whatever they call it, and all of that. Even if you have a very small following on Twitter, or if you have no following whatsoever on YouTube or something like that, it still helps because what basically happens is, and I don't particularly like it because it feels like a popularity game, and I don't care for those. But for the health of the actual stream and the archives as well, obviously, you sort of got to play the game that they want you to play, which is anything that has impact and impressions and retweets and favorites and shares. And all of those things across the two platforms count a lot for those, will basically get suggested to other viewers, will flag higher in searches. So it basically helps a lot. It helps doing sideways promotion. Now, with that said, that's pretty much all I have for public service announcements. I'm going to mute these for a sec. Winter is coming, apparently, which is why I have a jumper on today. So we're going to do controls. Now, controls are a bit of a tricky thing. Somebody in chat was saying, call to CEO. Yeah, I don't do SEO, I don't do trackers, I don't put any crap that I can avoid on the website, which is one of the reasons why I haven't had a public Google Calendar on the website yet. I will probably cave into that one. I don't want my website to actually track people. I don't like it. Anyway, controls. Now, controls is one of those things where you can actually find quite a few objective parameters, quite a few first principles you can go by. But because it's a visual thing and it's the main point of interaction with your rig for a lot of people, you will also find so many subjective things that you will always pretty much struggle to push those first principles on anybody else. And this being a user interface thing, it's pretty much all that matters. So the last time, what was it doing here? I still have some odd settings around. The last time we were looking at connecting a few things, and I'm also looking at trying to get my manipulators back if I can. Search children. What am I doing here? Why have I lost? Oh, there you go. Fair enough. I model for like 10 minutes to add a seat, and all my tool settings are all over the place now. So we had hooked these up, which is basically all we did before. I've moved the unicycle up, which I am gonna undo. We're gonna stay centerward. Now, designing controls. The tricky thing is, the opinion piece. Wow, surface rebuild, not a great name. The fact that they're opinion for a lot of people. And the first principles that you can apply are fairly simple. So there's a few things I really don't like when I see them in controls, but for some reason they get done a lot. So this to me is a terrible control. One of the reasons is if you're sideways, you can't really tell anything about it. All you get is a straight line. So things that have no dimensionality for something, for 3D, like the clue is in the name, that basically can be seen from any point of view. Not a great idea. The other thing I dislike, and this is true for squares, rectangles, and circles, and all of that, is shapes that have no directionality whatsoever. You do something like these, especially when you're rigging things like wheels and so on, there is literally nothing, unless you look at the valve here, that suggests at a glance what you might have done with this thing. You don't know, and you don't know if it's facing a certain direction, what is going on. It's not a huge fan of that. Squares or rectangles or whatever you want to see, whatever you want to use, that is also not great at directions. It might fare a little bit better, but you're still not going to be able to see for a square anything that is what 90-degree interval you're in. For a rectangle, like, it's basically going to be tough to say what direction it's in. Again, if you have something that doesn't have a clear directionality, which is anything symmetrical down that line, then you're kind of out of luck. You always have to look at numericals to know what is going on. It's not great. That's don't love it, and I'd rather people don't do it. Now, always sticking to first principles, control colors, and I've seen borderline political wars over the control colors. So this is somewhat academical, and that's why I don't want to spend too much time on it. There are, and you can find tables out there, very good principles to find what colors work. A lot of that stuff comes from typography, from old school design, from page layouts. People that were doing real magazine work before magazines kind of disappeared, when printing was something that was fairly expensive and fairly tricky, found out a lot about what colors work. Now, a lot of that is shifted toward cyan, magenta, yellow, black kind of things and so on. But there are very good guides out there about what colors work together. Now, let me explain that, I guess. Now, the other thing is there's this idea that you can make standard controls for a rig, and then every rig uses those standard controls all of the time. And I've actually seen it at several places I've worked as well, where there's this idea that you can build this universal rig layout for whatever biped you're ever gonna do that place you're working for at that time, and nothing's ever gonna change. I don't buy it. I find that if you have controls that are not at all customized for what you're working with, they will just fight each other. It's like the classic thing is fingers. Some creatures I've worked on had really stubby fingers. Some had much longer or odd numbers of fingers or stuff like that. And it's like, and if you have some types of cylinders with some types of proportions, they just do not work well in one case or in another. So again, not a fan of that. Now, color-wise, the tricky thing is that depending on what you do with the creature itself, whether you have, and that's pipeline-centric and a number of other things, and whether the colors of that creature change, creature, prop, anything really, as it goes through the rigging stages, like maybe starts grayscale, then the surfacing department is finally finished with some stuff, so it gets rolled back and the rig starts getting some colors after the art is approved, or even some textures after the surfacing pass is done in first stage. You will find that the color of the object might change, and that might completely nuke whatever color scheme you had thought of. And I've seen people doing, the left side is going to be predominantly blue, the right side is going to be predominantly red, which reduces the palette a lot, and then it just works horribly because the creature is this dark brown that absolutely murders those colors when the curves are on top of it. But that mostly affects some level of color contrast, so some choice of palette, as well as the actual luminance of that color, the intensity of that color. So all of these things will come into play and will reduce your palette choices to some things and so on. Now, the last things, these is not considered enough, I reckon, but it's also incredibly tough to sell to like 90% of the people. There are colors. If you care at all about what that rig reads like in the actual viewport, there are colorblind people, and there are colors that for colorblind people just do not work. And that is like even mild color blindness. If you pick the wrong combination of background color with color on top of it, or two colors in a sequence, for some colorblind people, that's actually really, really, really bad, like impossible to tell apart. And there are colorblind friendly schemes out there that you can actually have a look at. So careful if you do something like FKIK is encoded in your colors, but you keep exactly the same icon, like the same kind of look for both controls to suggest things. At least for those, try to disambiguate so that colorblind people can actually read them. I have literally seen a subset of animators really struggling with some rigs in the past because this was not taken into consideration. And if you think it's a very small number, like bear in mind that if you look at a lot of games out there, color blindness is prevalent enough that most games that have a busy enough visual interface will actually have a colorblind mode. And AAA titles don't waste money on things that are of no use to anybody. So, with the first principle spiel out of the way, I am going to stick to these crappy controls for a little bit longer because I know I said I wouldn't do things off stream, but I also don't want to waste time, like people's time, by modeling curves and things like that on stream. I might actually redo this rectangle because it's driving me nuts. Now let me catch up with the chat for a moment. So, what is your take on mesh control? Press to Premolite. Looks pretty personally. So people are asking, what about mesh control? As in, if you've ever seen the Prem Press to the proprietary software in DreamWorks and Pixar, it's been demoed a lot. People have done similar things. I think even Jason on Nimble Collective had an example of how he emulates it with cut down meshes. But anyway, I don't mind it. I actually quite like the idea of the interaction with the mesh, but I don't think it replaces HUD style kind of controls like curves on top of things. There's a limited amount of real estate for something on screen, especially when it's in 3D, and if your controls are completely conflated to the geometry, it can get kind of tricky to stash things in there. Now, Prem and Presto also have an advantage of doing something with vanilla Maya, or with a customized Maya, which is they have full control over all the callbacks with the viewport and so on, so they can do more in terms of what menus and what interaction backwards with the rig they actually have. A lot of that you can actually, you can do in Maya if you go through enough pain with custom manipulators and a lot of commands and good coordination, but it's a lot of work. I would like to actually show something like that in the future, but it's much, much later on. So is there a common left-right control color choice out in the wild? I don't think there is. I think, like, if you really want to find the standard for left-right, you can look at things like engineering, electrical, and a number of things have needed to establish that language. And I think white or black for negative and left, and red for positive or right is the most common, but people will do whatever. And Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the actual read. That's enough questions to answer after coffee. All right. So I actually probably need to catch up with what we were doing, but the last time all we did was connecting these, and that was pretty much it. Um, Now, here is something that we need to have a look at, which is, in this case, the mesh is split enough. And I don't mind if the mesh hierarchy, well, if the geometry hierarchy has some bearing on what happens when there are rigid transformations, but in general, I don't suggest it. So if we decided that the pedals were to be driven by the wheel and we don't want complex switching rigs, so let me actually get where is the wheel. And we decided to do something like that, so that whenever this control rotates the wheel, the pedals move as well. You know, we're absolutely positive the animators will never change their mind. Not a great idea. Not super against it if you need something quick and dirty. You know, if you're trying to turn around a commercial within the week, that's fine. Anything long term, there is, in my experience, there's never been something that was absolutely we're not gonna change it that wasn't then changed. So the moment you start conflating your geo hierarchy with the actual needs of the rig, you're in dire straits, because eventually it will need to be rearranged, and maybe your surfacing department actually has surfacing shaders and things like that tied to the actual hierarchy, and that will break surfacing or something else. So not a fan. I prefer, more especially for something that is made of many objects, things that are obviously and absolutely combined, and there's no way they're not going to be in all of that. I'm fine with those getting, like, if they get skin, I'm fine with those being pretty much anywhere, and surfacing or like geometry centric departments that need to have the hierarchy set up a certain way can take over. But other than that, I like things to be split by whatever is not a clearly combined part. So if something like these, these items are combined, fine. That's that's perfectly fine by me. It's pretty unlikely, unless there's a shot where the spokes break and I have to ping off, that you need to decouple it, and in that case, it's normally a special rig. So with that out of the way as well, let's go back to our controls for a second. And now we got to the point where we got this spinning. Now the next thing to do is actually get something down for the pedals, I guess. I'm gonna get myself a square that is not done by conflating different things like that. Now, yep, I do have those shapes. So, and this is gonna be painful to watch. I'm sorry, but I gotta do it. I gotta get a decent curve. And I know several people have remarked that seeing me work with Vanilla Maya is painful to watch. I agree. I practically never do it. So I literally have to find out how to do things like create the curve or stuff like that, because it's things that we've had library set up for such a long time ago. And I mean, seriously, I do not remember how to create a curve. That's a direction, I think. We're going for right. Okay. Man, this is terrible. Create menu. Yes, thank you. I always forget this. Yeah, sure. I'll take the CV curve tool. And I tend to prefer using linear curves, and mostly because the snapping and all of that tends to be pretty easy. Create curves, CV curves, curve tools. Yeah. Yeah, anyway. So just getting yourself a square. That's all I want. All I want is a square. If you give it some direction, you get bonus points. Anything that expresses direction in. Wow. Okay. Sure. So I thought I was grid snapping, but apparently I was snapping to something else. So the marking menus are probably the only thing about Vanilla Maya that I like, because I like them. I remember well enough. And cool. And I probably have things in marquee mode. No, I don't. Do I have something set to normal again? No. Anyway. Maya Snap, enjoy. Yeah, so somebody was saying right click to select component bond. Yeah, anyway. I don't know. Occasionally, like, I start messing up with things for the modeling, and things don't go quite that well for me. Like, after a while, I have to reset just about half of Maya. Anyway. So snapping is something where I really miss XSI. Now, parenting shapes, if you don't know, there's you can actually parent individual shape parts. Let me get rid of that. And that's after you get them roughly in the same spot where you want them, you can just go, well, actually even without that, you can go parent dash add minus S to say add something instead of doing weird switching things, which shapes don't work, and S to say enable shapes to do just that. So current that. Now finally in 2017 they actually added the metro transforms. It's remarkable how long that took, but hey, it's there now. And do I actually have, yes, so that's an actual shape. Other way around. It was correct. I just did not have enough stuff selected. Now that's an add, so these will stick around, which is actually quite convenient if you want to recycle it. It only took 5 minutes to get a square in there. I'm sorry for that. Well, not quite sorry, but I think we're extending with shape like that. And we're definitely not. We're letting Maya do dirty Maya things, so let's stick to that for now. Finally, with a square under our belt, we can also start working on the pedals. Let me see. Okay, chat is quiet. Now, do we have something already in place for the pedals? So, don't care about the God node. No, we don't have anything for the pedals just yet. So, usual song and dance, do we have an input? Do we have an output? Do we care about either? We definitely care about an input for the pedals. So we're going to formalize that in some way. We definitely want a control of sorts. We will want the form, as in we want to go out to the geometry, and we'll do that soon enough that we can actually create one. Now, get ourselves a curve of sorts. Like if I'm using semi-vanilla Maya, like if I'm trying something new, or what have I done here? Nothing good. If I'm trying something new, like if I need to do things vanilla-ish, then one of the things I normally do is create myself a library of stuff in a hierarchy somewhere, palette style, and I will duplicate and move those around. I am sure that's not particularly mind-blowing for anybody. And gonna master control shape. So let me just make sure I haven't messed up any names. Now this would be pedal sam, so that's an actual shape. Naming is hard. So get primitive curve square. No wobbly bob. Sadly, get primitive curve square will get to what I had before, which is a despicable mix of multiple curves. No, not even just multiple shapes under the same transform, actual multiple curves. Maybe if you set it to linear, it will actually just collapse it to one linear. But yeah. So somebody was saying, and I guess I could check it out, but if you do, if you want a square, do these and get yourself a square. Problem with that is that it gets you 5 objects, not 1 plus a shape. It will get you a group and then another 4 groups with 4 shapes. Yeah, in exercise, get primitive square, sure. I agree with that. Now, back to these. This is in the wrong place, so we might want to fix it. Remember that if you, if you want to move something like that, try not to move the control. Get yourself a buffer first. Is that just... That's interesting. So was me grouping that actually putting it somewhere else? No. I must have had something else selected clearly. For a second I thought like something had happened. If you're gonna be watching the archive, you can rewind. But I think I had something else selected, so my hierarchy got scrambled a bit. So 2 objects got grouped together and extracted from somewhere, God knows where. Now, back to pedals. Here's something that you might want to consider, which is splitting pedals left and right. In this case, 2 ways to do it. You could actually have left and right components for the pedals. There's some asymmetry to them, obviously, which if you deal with just rotations, who cares? If you deal with translations, you have to make calls and negative scaling or not. But in this case, I probably wouldn't do that. And here's why. When you rig something, try not to rig vertically from, oh, I can do all of these things, so I will do one of them and then escalate it. Interface first actually works as well in this case. Talk to the animators if you need to. Look at the shot list if you have one, and figure out the use cases. So the 2 classic cases for something like this will be somebody riding it, and the desire being, and we discussed it last time, so I'll keep it brief, and the desire being you move the god node around and everything follows the pedals, the wheel, and so on, or some other rig, some character sitting on it and driving it from the pedals and wanting the wheel to react. Now, the classic scenario where you go, okay, something needs to drive the pedals, so that informs how they're rigged, is usually people will want to, because they need to be absolutely synchronized, people will want to constrain one side of the pedal to the leg that they actually want to animate, so that they can get the animation going from the body down, and the other one, it's not like they can constrain it to the other foot, because they can't do anything other than follow where the first one is going. So normally you want one to be drivable, one to be controllable from outside, and the other one to just follow. And what they will do is constrain one of the 2 pedals to a foot so that it's driven, and then constrain the other foot to the other pedal. So it's a bit circular. It will go in circles inside your rig, but if you have good decoupling between the leg components and fit, that's usually right. Now that's enough blabbering about that specific detail. Again, I tend to place things where I want them. Find the master side by agreement if you want. Normally, I tend to prefer the right as a master side, but there's really no good reason about it. And there's no political reason about it either. So did I just move? Yeah. So let me zero that out. Yeah, we say the buffer is what we use to establish the default transform as something that has a decent center. And if you don't know, and the exercise people were the ones asking for this, you can middle click menus from Maya 2016 and on, and it will repeat whatever the last command that was issued in that menu was. So, okay. So somebody was saying the point here, I think, is to use Vanilla Maya. The point is to start from Vanilla Maya for every season and only use things that we write, things that are available in Vanilla, and the following season, if there's going to be multiple, using whatever was actually produced in the previous season. That's fine. So yeah, there will be scripting. I don't know how many convenience little scripts kind of things will do, because those are nice, but they sort of take time and take you down tangents. Not that I'm not going down enough tangents today anyway. Now, next thing to do, align it to whatever piece of geo you actually want or care for, and again, I know it's painful to watch me use Vanilla Maya, but it's okay. I woke up at 7 a.m. for you guys, so you will have to deal with this kind of pain. Now, normally I will be more precise about stuff like this, but at this point we don't really care about finessing controls. In fact, I normally would use a square, as I mentioned before. Let's give it some directionality, because it's really irking me that it actually, for something that rotates, it has no sense of directionality whatsoever. There you go. It will probably make more sense in the other direction for the sake of selecting. So here's another thing, if you want, not really first principle, and this is more craft than anything informal, but try to make things selectable. I see a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of rigs, especially in demo reels, where everything is nicely flush with the geometry. Every control is nicely flush and close, or has precise offsets to the next control and so on. Don't do that, because the moment the geometry has any inflation or offset of its own, it starts covering the controls. When you have controls that have any shake and everything is flush, it gets really messy to try and select anything. Give yourself some clearance between the controls. Don't be afraid of having points and stuff sticking out for people to grab. Now, with that out of the way, again, the next thing we want to do is actually connect these. So we say we're going to have an input, and that is going to drive the buffer, and that could come from pretty much anywhere. So let's start getting ourselves one. What did we... So let me also get rid of the geo. Well, not get rid, but at least in the outliner, collapse it a bit. So we've called local word, this kind of stuff. For now, we're gonna stick to that. Whatever you want to do. Like this is pretty impromptu. And give it a control color as well. So that's the shape. Sure, we'll color the shape, not the outliner color though. Let's reuse red. That way we absolutely ensure this is confusing. So somebody was asking, I recall watching a top tier animator faffing about rotating their character just to be able to select the control. The question being, is this a failure of the rig, or is it inherent to using curves? Now I would say in some cases it's going to be inevitable, and it depends on what you rig as well. There are some controls that are just going to disappear, and that's where tools and synoptics and things like that, or good context tools or tools, rigs that respond well to peak walking will actually help. But in general, I would agree, and that's why I was saying don't make things flush with the geometry. If to like this is, I'm doing stuff that is really bad, and we'll fix it eventually. Like something like this, especially if it was even larger and like be tied to the wheel. Let's say somebody might want to animate this wheel from either side. So this is a terrible shape. There's nothing good about, and yeah, it's something that people do all the time. You can't tell what direction it's facing. You cannot pick it from, if you flash on the side, like it's going to be a fight to pick it. If your camera is on the other end, you will have, if you're lucky, your spokes aren't too tight. If this was a If these are Morse blocks, it would be practically impossible to select it. People would have to change, like go out of their shot camera, go out of or orbit with every camera they had and pick something. So I agree. I mean, it's not 100% always possible to make every curve visible. It's physically impossible, especially if you keep them somewhat contextual with the geometry. But yeah, I would say it's a fault of whoever designed those controls and their layout if you can't select things from a reasonable number, a reasonable width of angles. Okay, back. Now, we were saying same thing we did before. We will want to take this local word item. It's so convenient that we have everything center word, but your life won't always be this easy. And we're gonna stick to the same kind of simple connections that we worked with before for now. So we know that we're interested in whatever word space this is, and we want to actually, we know this is word itself, so we don't need a complex connection. We don't need to do anything more than this. Now and they should actually service. Now where these belongs, actually, obviously the shape is now offset. So we actually, what do you know? We actually do want to have an offset in there. And for the sake of consistency, I think we're using a plus minus average on this one. Yep. So, and it's already in a space with light. Normally, again, I will name these things somewhat more sensibly. So let's go back to this pedal sem component. So this is the part of the streams, like the pure rigging part, noodling nodes and all of that. I really can't avoid it. If you guys want to keep the chat going while this happens, it might make it less painful for you to watch. Yeah, there is gonna be noodling. It's rigging. There's gonna be considerable amounts of noodling. It's absolutely inevitable. So the tricky bit about doing something like this, by the way, is that this is not a super great idea all the time, and we'll get into it when we get into proper transforms and so on. But be careful when you just have simple offsets, because very often, like getting them the slightest bit right will mean that they do not work anymore with rotation. For thought, or rather something for your consideration. So plus minus average. Okay, that's the right direction. In fact, I should just look at what these transfer values are. 147, and that's it. And then oh, I duplicated something. I was like, why did it come in like that? And then I just remember I duplicated another one. So that's okay. Now, so somebody was saying the node editor readjustment when you move nodes drives me insane. Yes, I actually quite like the node editor compared to what was there before, which was the hypergraph in Digimod. But I wouldn't mind getting the one thing the hypergraph did well. You could basically only really toggle between the two. I would like to see both at the same time. Was some indication of the hierarchy would be nice, something that you can toggle on and off. And the UI is pretty snappy, like even with large number of nodes, it's not super ideal, but it's okay, scales alright. But the interaction between whatever you do with the nodes and the window, oh man, that's murderous. Now, with that aside, before we start going into Maya bashing, which there will be some of at some point, but it's not the point of this. So you don't see a connection between orange mesh and stuff like this. Yeah, you can still fish that stuff up. I don't have an issue. Like the deformers in Maya, like pretty dodgy how they deal with the graph. There's very odd conflation of tools and evaluation graph and data graph, and the way it's actually laid out is not quite the way it's laid out in memory. And even if you save the scene file, you can see some oddities there. Now, let's actually rig something. Now, the next part, what we actually wanted to do was connect these to the pedal and start doing something interesting with it. So, do I need these? Probably not. And pedal control. Now we're gonna do the silly direct connection thing. What did we do for the wheel? Were we actually driving the HRC directly? Yes, we were doing something terrible like that. Let me also get myself a joint. That didn't come out right, but you get what I mean. There's not going to be any recreational drugs on the stream. I'm not going to get myself that kind of joint. And what were we using for names here? Yeah, sure. We'll have some redundancy. So with this done, we need a quote boat. No, we don't need a quote boat. I mean, this is going to be archive, which is pretty bad as is. We definitely don't need a quote boat to remind me of all of these things as they start piling up. So, again, this is the part where you go a bit slow, noodling, more noodling. Same thing we've done before. All we want to do is grab the word transform for these and the connection editor, bane of my existence, but sometimes it's actually pretty useful. And working with just one screen, part of one screen because of the stream, man, that's tough. I don't know how single screen people do it. You have my respect if you're a single screen person. Any less than two, and I'm like, this is crushing me. I know you can expand to see your inputs and output of a given node if it's connection by level. I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure. Oh, it would be great if you could expand its connections by level. You kind of can with this stuff. So if you're in additive graphing mode, then you can pick up anything, like add it. And if this is at 0, you will only get whatever you've added. And that's true for the connections as well. And I just remove everything that I was using from the UI, which is great. It'll be fine. So all you get is this. Now, if you actually expand these to other values and you keep pushing that, it works all right. The other thing you can do is travel the connection with shortcuts. So, well, you can't see the keyboard, but it's the greater than and less than, which is the same with modeling. It's always been like that, growing a selection in Maya. So -1 will get you infinite everything. But if you want it to be sort of dynamic, I guess, then if you do 1, that will help you out. 2, will get to 2, not surprising. So these will go connection tiers wise. Now, if you need to add to what you were doing, less than, your left arrow looking one is going to select everything upstream. So you can then, if you want, invert that selection and hide. And the right one, so greater than, is going to select everything downstream. I use those a lot. I have a couple custom ones. Eventually those I might actually put back together. Sorry, just a sec. So I might put some tools that I did for myself back together and release them or something like that. I find that time spent writing yourself things that parse the graph and gets to the interesting bits of the graph when you have a very well-known structure and procedure, they tend to pay off. So, oh wow, it's 8:16. We've been at this for a while now. In theory, I'm supposed to stop the stream now and pick and take questions, but it doesn't seem like a great idea. There's not so much question material going on yet. Hopefully we got enough of the first principles out of the way that the next time around we can actually focus on doing some rigging. So we'll do the horrible thing again of driving things by the joints. It's fine, we're in word space, this should actually work. And we were matching things, and that's sort of why I was matching things to that point. Because it's just easier to deal with that stuff. Now, this geometry had offsets to it, which were convenient to set things up. Once you start hooking things up like that, you can start taking away those offsets if you've respected them as you rig. If you didn't, then get yourself something with minimal offsets. Like pivot things where you want to rig them not too far off from the bounding box of the object is my recommendation. So these HRC, or add yourself into ring groups. So I'm not a fan of having too many transforms snaking down a hierarchy of geometry. Now, this is just a shape, so showing shapes while doing this kind of work, not super great. That's the other pedal, that's the one we're interested in. And this one was a centerpiece. So, see, this is where you go, okay, pedals, HRC, maybe, maybe the model. So, not a great idea. And you want to split that a little bit. And also not a great idea to do what I'm doing, which is liberally messing with geometry. It would be cool if we only could show curved shapes to limit certain view of that objects in the outliner without showing geo shapes. So you can actually tweak the outliner for a bit if you, the only thing is you only have one way to do it, which is auxiliary nodes. So you might find, and you can turn auxiliary nodes on and off and that will purge the outliner. That's also true for the node editor. Problem is it's one wide thing, it's one wide category, but you can customize it pretty easily. We're also gonna have a look at assets, which actually do some pretty good magic tricks for pick walking and filtering the outliner. I can do this. So this will be singular. Or how painful is this for you guys? Actually, I'm curious. Like, how bearable is the noodling and naming and stuff like that? Because I mean, I would have left the stream at this point, I think. Now, what we want to do is we are now interested in this pedal and not in the other pedal. There's a lot of pedaling here. Oh god, that was terrible. I've been a dad for a month and now the dad jokes start. So that's worked out. This one we actually want to set to the middle and we'll care about it some other time. All right. We're in a better place than when we started, which is okay. We're not in a better place than when we started because Maya crashed saving a scene. All right, so I can catch up with the chat, I guess. Surprised it took that long. Yeah, to be absolutely fair, Maya's crashiness has been up and down a lot over the versions. Man, I hope I can recover that scene because there was actually a good chunk of work in there. So I'm gonna do my file browsing off screen, and Yeah, crashiness has been up and down. We've had a couple versions of 2016 that for rigging, I actually really like. I think my crashes were down to, on average, one every 3 or 4 days. If you take out the ones coming from when you do C++ development, you absolutely pummel the memory or whatever. Sorry guys, this is not super fun to watch, I'm sure. I like the empty my interface. But it said it saved, and it didn't. This is very painful. How much work did I lose? Alright, I'm gonna look at recovering that before I mess with the scene and that gets lost during the timing and all of that. This is so painful. Yeah, well, live stream it is. Isn't it in the temp folder? It gave me a message about, yeah, I looked at that and it gave me a message about it being in my actual user something. So I was looking in there and I couldn't find it. I could probably scan the C drive for all MAs. I've also found, and I don't know if it's a legitimate bug or it's me not noticing the right things. I've had sometimes announcements where it will tell me something, it will give me an error message, it will give me a path, and that path is clearly tied to a variable. So the error message does pick up one of the environment variables, but the way that file was saved or whatever that message was tied to another variable, so there were mismatched, which is somewhat painful. All right, yeah, this is not helping. I'll have to find out, basically. Oh, I might have found something. So that's an older crash, clearly. Yeah, we'll find that. Anyway, so I guess, 6 minutes from the end of the stream, as good time as any. App that to the stamp. Yeah, at least we know you're a genuine streamer, not a fake one playing a video. Yeah, I'm not doing a Britney Spears here. So the thing is, I did find one of those, so I can actually start. Well, I did find two, so I can actually start crawling the directories for that. Yeah, I did. Like people are suggesting directories. Update a local temp is where one was, but there's not the other in there. I don't know if I changed my variable at some point. It's alright. Do we have any questions while I actually go through this pane? And searching it here. Nah, it's not in there, it's lost. I'll redo that stuff off screen. It was like, without talking about it, it's only like 5 or 10 minutes of work anyway. Join us on the next stream and Raf rather angrily teaches us to script the time not to break. It works, yeah. Yeah, I actually should turn that on when I'm streaming. So I'm gonna raise my desk. This might be quite noisy for you guys. Yes, I have a standing desk. It's probably the #1 rigging plugin you really want. It's a standing desk. All right, 5 minutes to go. If there are no more questions, I'm gonna stop the stream here and actually go back to digging out files and then drive to work. In fact, I'm probably gonna drive to work and dig out files later. What do you think is the biggest game changer in rigging during the last 5 years? Anything revolutionary? Game changer? It's tough to know. It's tough to tell. So rigging, I think, is one of the most backwards disciplines of all. Like if you look at what happened in surfacing and lighting, I don't like the word, it's super buzzwordy, but in this case it applies. If you look at the number of paradigm shifts that have had in rendering, lighting, surfacing over the last 20 years, like there's been several, and some of them have been pretty massive. The move from the very very like spotlight shadow map driven stuff to IBL, to image based lighting, the move from various various types of rasterization, then hybrid rasterization, ray tracing, then path tracing, then bidirectional ray tracing, path tracing, and so on. It's pretty big, and it's, if you look at modeling, they've had the whole move to sculpting and retopo. Rigging never had that. Like I started rigging in rigging proper, as in trying to get characters out rig, I think in 94 or 95, and I started using Softimage 3D, which had IK, and that was mind blowing, in 96 or 97. In 20 years, I haven't seen anything revolutionary. Now, something that I do like is the work that Maya 2016 has done with finally adding some parallelism. So that's the other main issue I have, is rigging and animation have not scaled with the hardware. They were still chasing the old model of CPUs, so you're gonna get more gigahertz, and that's it. And that was just failing horribly. So 2016 introduced parallel valuation and GPU level on some deformers. 2017, I think, introduced custom evaluators. That's pretty big, but it's not really a change in how you work. But yeah, I'd say that's the biggest thing. And just to not make this purely about Maya 2, it's all I'm gonna use 3D wise. Well, maybe Fabric a little bit. Other people have had to follow suit, and other people were actually ahead of the game in some regards. But LLVM and Fabric might actually be quite powerful. The only thing is that sadly Fabric is underrepresented and underused, so it's hard to see its true potential. But LLVM, and LLVM is basically a platform to build compilers on, to put it in layman terms, and Clang is the product of LLVM, and Clang is Google's compiler in a way. LLVM made a huge difference for everything. It's got some amazing libraries and all of that. So if you have Fabric with Kale, that is largely due to LLVM. The things it has taught to people are many, and so I don't know if Vex in Udini is actually pretty good. Vex is kind of their expression language, I guess, and I'm greatly diminishing what it is here. And that is actually, I think, just-in-time compiled, and does a pretty decent job of parallelizing, and I wouldn't be surprised to find that that's also been revamped to have LLVM in the background or something like that, or that they did learn some lessons from LLVM if they're running their own everything, if they're cooking their own compiler. So, start sort of catching up to hardware scaling. So the GPU pipeline and parallelism in CPUs, I reckon, is the only thing that happened in the last 10 years, maybe. All right, 8:29, so another 30 seconds or so. If there are no questions, I'm gonna be closing this down. To be honest, must have been hard with the colossal amount of legacy they might have to deal with. Yeah, I imagine the work of engineers must not have been an easy one. What would you say to the idea that the reason rigging hasn't progressed much is due to the majority view that the skeleton hierarchy is the solution? I think rigging and animation are holding each other back. That is one of the main issues. It's like, as I said, the rig is your interface. For animators, the rig is your interface to the software and to add to the character. So, and animators are creatures of habit, and it's probably one of the most well-established disciplines, and it hasn't changed much, which means, unlike surfacing and lighting, which means animation has very, very much sedimented itself, workflows-wise and so on. So they keep asking for the same thing, and they keep getting the same things, and the complaints remain the same. it's very hard. It's a very bad codependent relationship where rigging holds animation back, and because animation has been held back for so long, especially performance-wise, then it will keep having concerns that shouldn't apply any longer, and it will hold, making big jumps in rigging. I don't know. It's hopefully something that's about to break. Now that you can actually really squeeze performance for rigs, I think that is a bad catch-22 that could be broken. All right. Thanks everybody for attending. We will be back this weekend, and it will be the regularly scheduled stream. So absolutely horrible for anybody that is not in Australia or the States. I'm sorry about that. And sorry for the crash. Not my bad. I'll see if I can recover that file. Otherwise, I'll redo all of those 5 minutes of work. Cool. I am stopped recording. See you soon.